Hello, I'm Margaret Iacono, Assistant Curator at the Frick Collection. Today we're in the Oval Room of the Frick Collection, where we'll be visiting some paintings that are on loan to us from the Norton Simon Museum of Art in Pasadena in California. We'll begin here with a beautiful painting by Spanish artist Bartolomé Esteban Murillo. Specifically, he's a 17th century Spanish artist, and he painted this wonderful, beautiful painting of the birth of St. John the Baptist in about 1660. And just to give you the basic story here, according to the Gospel of Luke, Zechariah, who we see standing here, and his wife Elizabeth were old and childless. Zechariah, while dutifully lighting incense in the temple, is visited by the Archangel Gabriel, who tells him that he and his elderly wife will have a son, will name him John, and he'll be filled with the Holy Spirit from birth. Now, Zechariah, being elderly, is somewhat incredulous and asks the angel for a sign, whereupon he is struck mute. And he loses his ability to speak throughout the entire conception and through the birth of his child. Now, on the 8th day, after Elizabeth has given birth to the son, the townsfolk gather around and decide to name the child. And they choose to name him Zechariah after his father, despite Elizabeth's protest that he be named John. Zechariah signals for a tablet, a writing tablet, and writes down his name is John on the tablet, and suddenly regains the ability to speak. And the child, of course, is called John and fulfills the prophecy, and it is clear to all the people that this child is a very special child. Now, what we're looking at here is not actually the birth of St. John the Baptist, but the first bath. And none of the canonical stories actually describe the bath. Most likely, this is meant to be symbolic of John the Baptist's future vocation. And we see this wonderful copper basin from which the child has just emerged. And he is seated on the lap of one of his nursemaids and surrounded by 3 other nursemaids. His father, Zechariah, looks on, while his mother, Elizabeth, lies in bed recovering from her labors and is attended by a nurse as well. Now, there are 2 interesting sources of light in this painting. The child himself, who emits this wonderful glow, and this golden cluster of angels who peer down from the heavens upon the holy scene here. Now, it's interesting that Murillo decides to use the child as a source of light because the name John means morning star, Lucifer, and Christ calls John the lantern several times in the book of John. So, of course, this is probably symbolic as well. Also symbolic, I think, are these wonderful white glowing towels that the nurses are using to dry and swaddle the child. The 4th century St. John Chrysostom describes St. John the Baptist as being whiter than the whitest of garments. He tells us that if you took a white garment and compared it to snow, suddenly the garment wouldn't look very white any longer. Likewise, St. John the Baptist, compared to another holy man, outshines that other holy man by far. So I think it's possible that these wonderful glowing towels have some symbolic qualities. Also important are the words of St. Augustine, who tells us how important the birth of St. John the Baptist was on the church's calendar. St. John's birthday is still celebrated today on June 24th, and we're told that only 3 individuals in the canonical literature have their birthdays celebrated on the church's calendar, and that's Christ, the Virgin Mary, and St. John the Baptist. While the church celebrates the death of many saints and martyrs, they generally do not celebrate the birth. But because John the Baptist, like Christ and Mary, were believed to have been conceived free of original sin, his birth is actually given a higher dignity than his death date. Interesting, too, is that Murillo creates these wonderful religious genre scenes. As you see here, we have these holy characters, but they're set in an everyday setting. We see this wonderful little puppy on a child's chair who looks on at the action, and even the figures themselves resemble figures that Murillo may have seen on the streets of Seville. The nursemaid that's holding him, instead of being a royal regal figure, is actually almost peasant-like in the rip of her garment. She's a working class person. So Murillo takes these people, these holy figures, and puts them into settings that would have been very recognizable to the people looking at them. Interesting, too, Seville at this time was a city in great despair. In 1660, we think this painting was painted, and just slightly earlier in 1649, the bubonic plague comes through and devastates half of the population. 2 years later, in 1651, a famine hits Seville, and riots break out in response to this. Similarly, the local river begins to silt up, and enormous taxes are waged on the people to support foreign wars. So you can imagine that this is a people in great need of some hope, and to some extent I think Murillo does provide this in his wonderful canvas. Most likely this painting was in one of the local churches or monasteries that was in Seville, and at this time there were nearly 70 monasteries and about 28 churches, so there are plenty of options of where this may have hung. We don't know specifically where the painting was installed, but we do know that by the early 1800s, Henry Galley Knight in England, a member of Parliament and an architect, a poet, and an author, had actually owned the painting, probably acquiring it during his travels in Spain earlier in the 1800s. In 1973, though, we know that the painting finds its way to Wildenstein and Company, and that is who Norton Simon purchases it from. And this is in addition to another painting by Murillo that Norton Simon already owns. So obviously, the great collector was quite a fan of this wonderful artist. If you'd like to learn more about this painting, please consult our catalog, which is available via our website at www.frick.org.